Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health TV and radio show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of three. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you're notified every week with my new podcast on Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you haven't already, join my free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. There is no downside. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health. You will be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your journey, in addition to truly taking control of your health. The protocols and supplements I discuss are all found at sarabantahealth.com. Today, I'm so excited to have Debra Atkinson back. She is my health fitness guru. For all of you, she is a Certified CoachU Graduate. She coaches clients in the areas of wellness, personal relationships, academic choices, career moves, growth in their personal training business, and she also helps with fitness. But we are going to be talking about osteoporosis today. Welcome, Debra. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you.
It's awesome to have you because I can talk about the diet. I can talk about the supplements you need for osteoporosis, but there's this missing piece. And I always think of it as that three-legged stool. If you don't have the weight-bearing exercises for your bone density, the stool's going to fall apart, right? So I'm excited to get into this topic of exercise for osteoporosis. But why don't we first start out with, there's different types of arthritis and how that relates to osteoporosis?
Well, it gets tricky. When somebody has both arthritis and osteoporosis, those two things, if you were to come to me and you were two different individuals, I would give you two different exercise prescriptions. We want someone who's got arthritis to do kind of a moderate weight, not too many, because then we're doing wear and tear because we have to do so many repetitions. We don't want to go there, but we also don't want to go so heavy that we stress those joints. But if you have osteoporosis, and we'll talk about how you get there, because you don't start there, but we want you to be doing the heaviest you possibly can. So you can see there's a little, what if I've got both? And often women do, especially if they reach their 60s and their 70s and beyond. Many of us are going to experience a little bit of arthritis. And I think it's those of us who've done the most impact earlier in our lives, and impact you didn't plan on, including, say, a car accident, or trauma you didn't beg for and stand in line for, but you got. Those things can contribute. And bone density wise, many of us who are now 50, 60, 70, and 80, we didn't know that we should start lifting weights in our 30s and our 40s. It wasn't habit. Hopefully all the while through, for our daughters or daughters-in-law, those younger women will get started sooner and not have this issue in the first place. But it becomes a little bit tricky, and yet can be done. There's always the, okay, I can't do this, but what can I do? And there's a long list behind that. And that's the important thing to remember. There's always something you can do, even if we're eliminating something that you can't.
Yeah, and you mentioned generational, because my mom's generation, they didn't lift weights, they didn't exercise, they weren't in sports in high school. It wasn't a thing for women. It was all based on men. And my generation, definitely we were athletes, but women are definitely not highlighted in the science and the studies and all that's going on, whether you're talking about diet, supplements, or exercise. So us women really have to be intentional about it. And if you end up having arthritis, you tend to not want to work out because it's painful. then that's going to have this cascade effect of increasing your risk for osteoporosis. So there's this catch-22 situation where you do have to do different exercises if you're in pain versus not for bone health. So let's get into what causes osteoporosis.
Well, it's what we know is it's low bone density. So basically, we have this remodeling going on, and I've always loved this image of, imagine you're making a pancake. And what happens constantly as you're making that pancake is you see the bubbles in the batter, and then they disappear from that area and they reappear and disappear. And that essentially is what happens in healthy bone as we're growing and we're young adults. And yet it's that remodeling, the filling in, the solid part is happening more frequently, more prominently than the holes. So the Swiss cheese effect. And yet as we age, we have less of that going on. It's not working quite in our favor. Lots of things we know, as you mentioned, diet, having the right supplements, and not just having those things present, of course, is gut health and how much we're absorbing of those things that we're actually taking in. But if you're not getting weight bearing exercise, there's really three different areas: weight bearing exercise, weight training exercise. And then, I don't know that there's a category yet in the research, but what I would call quite different, it's anti-gravity. And that is where yoga has recently come into play. And I'll let you know, I was the greatest devil's advocate recently in an interview with someone about that, saying, really, how is that true? Make me a believer, prove it to me. But we have so many things to do. So you want the full package. You want the bundle. You want the, I want the 3-for-1 if you possibly can. And I'm just going to back up one step to what you were talking about with arthritis, and people being reluctant because it hurts to move. I think it will hurt more the less you move. What we're finding is people are far more comfortable if they're in their 80s and 90s and they've got arthritis, but they have stayed in motion. They're far more comfortable. They're far more able to continue supporting themselves. So the downside is when you stop moving. So never stop. That's the key.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize the diet, because if today's diet, 62% of adults intake, what they're consuming, is not real food. It's processed foods and sugar, which, let's put aside what it's doing to your insulin resistance in your liver, but it's inflammatory. So then it's going to make your arthritic pain worse. You have low energy, so you don't feel like going to work out, but it's also putting stress on your body, including all that inflammation. And then it's also very acidic. And when it's acidic, like soda, pork, conventional beef, the processed food, that's going to leach the good nutrients out of your bones. So there's this whole diet part that no one's thinking about. And when I talk to my husband, for instance, he says, well, why do we have to eat so clean now? My parents are healthier than we are and they never had to think about gluten, and they didn't have to think about this or that. Well, they were eating real food, because the processed food wasn't here like it is today. And it's just normal to be eating these extremely acidic foods. And then you add in the stress of modern day life, right? That's extremely acidic, and that's leaching the nutrients out of the bones and causing inflammation. So causing more pain, so that we don't want to get out of bed and go do our workout. And then you've got the women, Debra, and you know this more than anybody, who are doing chronic cardio.
Yeah.
And so let's touch on that and why that is not good for your bone health.
Well, actually, what we find is with people who are doing more endurance exercise, and so we can take it to extremes, because that's where the studies are when we look at, say, long distance runners. And it doesn't matter actually if you're a male or a female, but you can't outrun bone density issues. I mean, and literally what happens, the more you're an endurance athlete, you prefer that, you're more lean, your frame generally is smaller, but you actually are setting yourself up for a fracture because you're getting lighter. You probably have a little less muscle mass because what you're doing is causing chronic stress to your body, which means cortisol, which means you're doing muscle wasting or in catabolism. Your body is using your own muscle for energy to do that endurance exercise. And that puts you in a poor position. When we have more muscle, we tend to have more bone density because muscle not only allows you to do the things that give bone density, but it also pulls on each end of the bone, making it stronger itself. So constantly, whatever else you might be doing, even if it's not weight training, if you have a little bit more lean muscle, your muscle is actually all day supporting your bone density by pulling against it in a stronger way. So for long distance runners, there's a Joe Friel. So he wrote the Runner's Bible, and he was a long distance runner himself and a coach. And he said, I couldn't outrun a bone density issue. I had a fracture to my lower leg, and the discovery is insulting, right? I'm an athlete, right? For crying out loud, that shouldn't happen to me. But you've got to still cover all of your bases. So for a woman who maybe not a marathon runner, you don't have to go that far. But if you're always doing cardio, what you're doing is kind of robbing yourself of that little bit of time in the weight room, even 10 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week. If you can exchange a little of your cardio for strength training, you're going to be so much better off.
So I do an in-body scan, and I always tell my clients to throw away their bathroom scales and go do an in-body or a DEXA scan, which shows your bone, your muscle mass, your water, intracellular, extracellular, and gives you all the pieces to the weight that is shown on the bathroom scale. And on that, it shows this percentage of your muscle mass in your legs to the rest of your body, because it's so important for how much muscle you have to support the rest of your body and how that is correlated to longevity. Mm-hmm. And so it just makes sense that more muscle mass helps with bone density, helps with longevity, and helps with the reducing the risk of any fracture. My parents are over 80 years old. My dad has neuropathy, and he has a ego, so he doesn't really want to walk with a cane. But I told him, I said, did you know that anyone over the age of 65 that breaks a hip has a 30% chance of dying within 12 months? That is a huge statistic. Yeah. So bone health for our parents and for us as we're getting older is more important than ever. And then that goes along with the healthy foods and the diet and getting rid of all of that stuff. So what are the exercises that you really pick out for bone health?
Yeah. So what you want to be doing is focusing on specific areas more than somewhere else. And if you think of it this way, it just helps you, I think, organize it, right? So you've got a plan. But what we know and call the osteozones are the hip, the spine, and the wrist. And, you take a look at your wrist, it's the smallest joint, but it does an awful lot for us. But namely, where we're going to get into trouble is if we're falling and we're trying to catch ourselves. And often that's the first notification someone gets that they have a bone density issue, because they've fallen shoveling or doing something maybe more fun, and they get an x-ray and find, oh my gosh, not only have you fractured or sprained, but you've got low bone density. And, that is just, you probably had it, but you didn't know it. Now you do. So it's a great opportunity, by the way. Anybody who's scared because they've gotten that information, don't be. It's an opportunity for what can I do now? So we want to focus on the hips. What would we do? Well, weight bearing exercise. And, we talked about runners. What happens to endurance exercisers? One of the problems that a lot of people think, and that not enough doctors, because they're front lines, they're the ones who do the bone scan, often give the results, and then we'll say, big go exercise, like start walking. And that's a great start. However, if you can walk 2 miles, you've probably done all the bone density good you're going to get. You don't get more bone density by walking 3 miles or 4 miles because your load has not changed. You weigh the same. Unlike a runner who actually may lose weight running more and more, and not always, we have to say that backfires on midlife women sometimes. But if you get more lean because you're an endurance athlete, you don't have that load. You're lighter. And so it's once you can do X amount, we call it minimum essential or effective stress. You don't have that MES that you need. So we're looking for, what else can you do? Can you hop? Can you jump? Even if just in place, little bitty jump rope, and pretending you've got the rope, 20 jumps 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 sets during the day for maybe 4 to 7 days a week. That gives your bone some stimulus. So you can do that in a little break, getting up from the chair during the middle of a sedentary work day. So those kinds of things target the hip, a leg press, a squat, where you're really able to press more weight than just your body weight, but pushing specifically and using the hip, really important. How do we load the spine? Well, a couple of things we have to be cautious of. So we don't necessarily want to load it from the top down because of the smaller vertebrae in the cervical spine and the neck and the compression fractures that are potentially more risky if you do have low bone density. But by chest pressing or push-ups and by pull-ups or bent over rows, or if you're at a machine or a cable and you're pulling toward you, that is loading the spine from the front and from the back. Those types of things. What I like to do to have clients get into loading the spine from the top down a little bit more, I don't encourage holding a weight bar at the back and doing back squats, because again, of that compression fracture potential, but wearing a weighted vest, starting with about 10% your body weight and wearing it for 10 minutes just around the kitchen. And then if you're going for a walk, wearing that weights your walk just a little bit more, but it's also loading your spine, not just from the ground up, because by the time that transfer of ground force gets from your feet to your knees, to your hips, to your spine, it's probably not a lot of impact coming upstairs for you. So you want something coming down. And then when you're lifting, when you're chest pressing, when you're pushing and pulling, you're loading those wrists. So the key really is just with your wrist, make sure that when you're holding those weights, pushing or pulling, that you get this. You don't let yourself get here, where we can do some harm to the elbow joint. So those kinds of exercises are really the biggest ones. And they're the best for muscle as well, because when you're doing what we call compound exercises, if you imagine a squat or sitting in a chair, you imagine pushing, you pulling, you're using multiple joints, which means multiple muscles. All that's working in your favor for body composition, but as well for bone density.
I love it. So because I am at a risk of osteoporosis only because of genetics and my mom. So I was told to get tested when I was in my 20s, but they said at the same time, this really doesn't mean anything because the mean value of the test is based on your age group and no one ever gets the test done when they're young. So that brings up, how does a person know if they are at risk for osteoporosis or if they are in that category?
Well, I will give you the good news and the bad news. And the good news is that almost everybody should probably assume they're at low bone density and treat themselves accordingly and start weightlifting. Okay, so we get in now if you want to, because our work here is done. But truthfully, we find that insurance doesn't really cover bone density scans until 60. And depending on your insurance, maybe slightly earlier or slightly later. And if you, like you, Sarah, have risk factors, and maybe you push the envelope and say, look, my mom had a fracture, but she wasn't 87. She was 55. I would like to know, I think I'm at risk. Or you might also say, I had a history of eating disorders when I was younger. That also could impact you. So there's lots of reasons why you might ask for it or demand for it strongly, right? And try to get that done. But I would suggest that probably most women over 40 are at some degree of osteopenia and or osteoporosis. So the no is when that scan comes back and you are somewhere at 2.5 standard deviations away from what they quote unquote call norm, which is a young woman in her mid 20s. So if you are not at 2.5 and beyond, that means you do have osteoporosis, but that inner rim between here's where we'd like you and you're not quite at osteoporosis yet, you're at osteopenia. And that is that, okay, that's just this. You got a wake up call. So you've got a chance to reverse it. But I also want to say this, in 1995 was the first time I started educating on osteoporosis, on bone density and exercise. And I had to define it. We had to say, what is this word, right? Nobody knew it like it's a household word now. And we would think, much more like we need to wrap you in bubble wrap and you need to be really careful. And you should, exercise only in the water and be really cautious. And we no longer think that, which is a very exciting time to be a woman and to be alive, because we can not only halt the losses, which is what we once thought that's the only thing we're trying to do. And if we do that, we're successful. We now know you can reverse it. So if you're a postmenopausal woman, I don't care if you're on hormone replacement or you're choosing not to be, you can reverse osteoporosis. And that's a very exciting time. So it's up to you with your strength training, making sure you're doing that, making sure you've got the right things in your diet and your gut health is good. So you're absorbing those things and you're dealing with sleep and stress, all the things we need to do anyway.
Exactly, because without sleep and without managing stress, we are creating an acidic environment and pulling out the nutrients out of our bones. I want to touch on protein and the importance of protein for bone health. I have family members that are now entering menopause and they're vegans and they're asking me, why are my fingernails so white? Why are my gums white? Why? And I'm like, you need to eat meat, let alone let's talk about protein with our in relationship to our bone health. Can you just speak to that?
Absolutely. And it's funny, as we record, I am making dinner tonight for two vegan friends. One of them actually is a relative. And I'm just thinking, I really would like to give them my mind full, tonight, but there's probably not the point of time to do it. But absolutely, they're in their early and mid 40s. And, if they're not in perimenopause and experiencing it, they are in it, right? So right now, if we could say to anybody, if I could go back 10 years, even 20 would be even better. I would do things differently. But, we used to, I mentioned 1995, still on the list for risk factors was eating a high protein diet at that point. So we have removed that, by the way. And I think this is still a fear with a lot of women, but isn't that bad, having a lot of protein or a lot of animal products? I think it's still a question. And I just would love every woman to know that's going to linger probably for our lifetime, because for more decades in our life than not, we have heard that rumor. We've heard some of that was science, but now it's been replaced. We know that not only for muscle, but for bone, because bone is a very high percentage of protein, you need to be consuming high quality protein products. And that, I think, is the thing we have to point out, Sarah. Much of the research that we used to hear that animal protein, quote unquote, causes heart disease or causes cancer. That used to be literally shared. What nobody shared behind the scenes is a lot of those studies were done more in terms of surveying people. And people who participate in those kinds of surveys need the money that they're handing out for participating in the surveys. And potentially the quality of meat that they were eating may have been bologna and hot dogs and not the quality that you're consciously seeking today. So there's a drastic difference in the research, but was it done on women like you, making choices like you at the meat counter, choosing the best possible? It's very different information that we've got to process, and we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples.
Absolutely. And they're using the hamburger meat with the bun. So is the heart disease coming from the bun and the saturated fat from the low quality processed meat from McDonald's? Or are you eating wild animal protein that is grass-fed, grass-finished, full of nutrients? And now we are in an environment where our soils are completely depleted of the nutrients that we think we're getting, our bone strengthening nutrients from the spinach and the green leafy vegetables that don't have that nutrients in them. And those might have oxalates, where the oxalates are actually degrading the bone health as well. And do you want to speak to the relationship with oxalates and bone health?
Yeah, and probably you can speak into that even to a greater extent. But I think the biggest thing is, women are so now aware, like I need more vegetables and getting those leafy greens. And even in our community, it's a little like having company tonight. It's like, is now the right time to have that conversation? Because first, I know they're taking that step. They're getting more conscious about getting more vegetables in. But, eating spinach and kale, which we're told this is the hail the kale, and it's the greatest micronutrient density food in the world, but it's an anti-nutrient. Actually, it gets in the way. Basically, it's like the roadblock on I-80. It is preventing the other good things that you're eating from getting absorbed and creating issues within your gut. Until, though, we experience it, you will deny it. And women in midlife, often, if they get to a certain point, it may go right through you. I hear that from a lot of women who it never bothered, but now it does. And it's just, again, it's like that, well, I was okay, like to a certain level. And then, once I started eating raw kale a little bit more, or I was experiencing more gas and bloatedness and constipation, diarrhea, and back and forth, it was like, then I couldn't handle it anymore. But it's like a lot of things, it's under the radar. It flies undetected until, and that doesn't mean it's not there, right? Until we get exposed to something. It's like your immunity, essentially. Like you can have that living there dormant, and it's doing damage, but not to the extent you realize it. But it is leaching bone density from you, preventing you from absorbing that calcium.
And causing leaky gut. And
Right.
we grew up on Popeye needing spinach for his muscles. So, right, we're being told that meat is bad, green drinks are good. Don't just eat celery, juice it and drink a 32-ounce celery juice for your health. And we're then told it's okay to be bloated and have these gut issues. That's normal. That is not normal. And the protein, the wild animal protein, is supplying the nutrients for our muscles and our bones. And I wanted to go back to your statement on walking for 2 miles. So I was traveling last weekend, and when you travel, you don't have your normal gym scenario. And I went into the hotel gym, and there was a treadmill and some weights. So very minimal. I'm like, okay, what can I do to get creative? So I took some 15-pound weights and I just walked on an incline on the treadmill. So factually, I'm thinking this is not much of a workout, but I'm doing both at once and I'm just trying to get something in. I have never been so sore, Debra, because I'm literally carrying on my legs 30 extra pounds of what my body's not used to carrying. And that shows you that you are exactly right, that after 2 miles of just your body weight, that's all it's going to get, right? But I incorporated something different that was going to put more weight bearing on my legs as I was walking on an incline versus just going out in the street and walking. So I thought that was just an aha moment for me. And it's always fun to try something new and different when you're traveling, because you have a different, excuse me, set of weights and things like that. So what are you seeing in women that they're afraid of when it comes to exercise?
Well, I think twofold. Number one, I think any woman is afraid of getting hurt, and literally any woman, for different reasons. Some of us because exercise is how we negate stress. And so we purge some of that adrenaline and those feelings and work emotions through us when we're exercising. Everything is better when you come back, right? Mama's happy, everybody's happy. That's how it works. And I think we don't want to get hurt for other reasons as well. Even if you're not an exercise lover, you're worried. And especially if you now know I've got osteoporosis and my doctor says, do this or do that, or heaven forbid, you're getting online and you're reading all things that have been there for 30 years. So some are outdated, but you're being told, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, as opposed to what can we do and what is the research? We should jump into what of the most recent studies talked about as far as osteoporosis goes. But I think it's that fear of getting hurt. And the other one is we still fear, many women collectively, getting bulky by lifting weights, because we are using the words, gain lean muscle mass. And that is like gain. I don't want to gain, right? And that sets off alarms.
And I love that you said that. I have a friend and client who is, you look at her on the outside, she's very normal weight, probably 130 pounds or so. And her doctor was smart enough to say, you're skinny fat. She needs to decrease her body fat, but build her muscle. And people think that when you build the muscle, then you're just going to get bulky. And it's this fear. But no one dies on their deathbed saying, I wish I had less muscle.
It's true. Right.
So what are the important nutrients? People always say, take your calcium. That's why we need to eat our spinach. What are the real nutrients that we need for bone health?
Yeah, such a great question. Well, I think if we come back to macronutrient, I think number one, don't forget the protein, because everybody zooms right into calcium. But the calcium, the vitamin D, and the magnesium together all are very important contributors to, supporting your bone health. And, vitamin D is also very important, kind of an indirect, because it actually helps you gain fast twitch muscle fiber. And so if you're in the weight room, you're doing the strength training exercises, then may find that you're not getting the things you deserve, like I'm not seeing the results or feeling greater strength. Part of that may be an insufficiency or deficiency in vitamin D, because it plays into, can you maintain it? And the benefit from that, the added benefit, not just bone density, is metabolism. So that and rapid, fast twitch muscle fibers, those are reaction skills. And while we want to do everything we can to gain more bone density so we don't risk a fracture if we do fall, but then we also want to look at, and while we're doing that, let's make sure we have balance, we have strength, so we don't fall. We have to have also those reaction skills. So for all of you who are practicing yoga in a cool, calm, collected, serene room, I want you to practice in the middle of the gym where people are moving all over and the music is loud and you are distracted, because that is where we fall.
Yes, my mom works out with a trainer, and he has her use the ball and to do a lot of balancing things, and it's really important because you've got those little tweaks, those little falls, that's going to be really detrimental as you're aging. The one thing that I always remember when I was in college, the conversation was all about swimmers versus gymnasts,
Oh, yeah.
because these swimmers were very muscular and, bigger women, right? And then the gymnasts actually could tend to be malnourished and, some eating disorders related, but bone density, the gymnasts outweighed the swimmers. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. And that's for anybody here, and I'm guessing everybody here, you influence children somehow. So maybe it's your grandchildren, maybe it's your children, because you can be 50 and have a kindergartner today, right? It's 2023. But really important, if you're looking at how can I help them? How can I encourage them? Number one, men and women both, young men and women, when we hit puberty, there is kind of it closes just a little bit. We can still add and increase bone density, but we have really done the most good up until that point in our adolescence. And so if a young woman, say, is reaching puberty at 15, up until 15, give her a jump rope, get her into basketball, into soccer, where she's got all kinds of trauma and force. And I just mean not necessarily getting hit by other people, but by leaping sideways and doing all kinds of different movements. But when you look at young women who either were participants in gymnastics or participants in swimming, we've removed gravity, right? So swimming is excellent for muscle. It's excellent for cardiovascular health, for so many other things. So we don't necessarily want to get somebody out of the pool. And for those of you we talked about, we opened with arthritis. The pool is a great place for you to exercise. However, again, you need to make sure forcefully you're working against that water, and you want what I call surf and turf, right? Not for dinner, but in the gym. You do your work in the pool, but you make sure also that you find the weight room 2 or 3 times a week. So you're doing strength training as well. So the impact actually that's what gets the bone to be remodeling and making sure that we're filling in those holes more frequently and more often than we are allowing the holes to find its way there. So gymnasts, definitely those people with a history of gymnastics, even though they may be leaner, they generally have put more impact on the bone, on landing. They're doing handstands, so they've got it throughout their body, their wrists, their spine, and their hip generally. And I know that seems like, well, that's such a risky exercise. And, in some ways it can be. However, at the end of the day, is it more risky because you have low bone density, right? So
I feel like as people get older, they get fearful of all of these activities, and then they slow down, but that's only going to make the problem worse. And so what would you tell someone who's listening and said, okay, I've got to get off the couch? Where do they start?
Such a great question. I think a lot of people would say start with walking. And I think that's a great habit builder, but I would suggest start with strength training, because if you are at all at risk, you're a little worried about your stability, getting strength training. And I would, if you have access to and it's possible, get on machine weights as you get started, because you've got a stable environment there. It's very difficult to do it wrong. It's very difficult to do it in a way that you could get hurt if you're feeling like I don't have much stability. If you're able-bodied, you're up, you're doing things in your regular activities of daily life, picking up free weights is probably a better step, because now we're also stabilizing, using the core, cautioning you to leverage a little bit with the rest of your body, but you're using that core and stabilizing while you're moving certain body parts and getting a little bit of power into your strength training is also important. So what I mean by that is, slow and controlled is wonderful. And I think we all associate, well, that's safer, slow, controlled, and that's wonderful. But the research also is pretty clear that adding power, so really pushing quickly and then lowering back down nice and slowly. So we're still under control. We're not just quickly moving, allowing everything to go loosey-goosey while we're doing it, but we're forcefully pushing. We pause, and then we slowly lower that weight. The research is pretty clear that power actually outperforms slow and controlled when it comes to both bone density and to weight management, the total energy expenditure at the end of the workout. So I would definitely start with strength training, and then you will find that the other activities like the walking or whatever may come next for you will become easier because now you have the strength and you also have the stamina in order to do it, which gives us the confidence, which I think is really the missing piece for a lot of people.
Well, and as you're talking about the power output, I'm assuming that's going to also have a better impact on your growth hormone and testosterone, which is then going to give you more feel-good hormones, more energy, more motivation, more drive, feeling younger, building that lean muscle tissue. Before we go, Debra, can you tell us what the risks are for women versus men in this issue of osteoporosis and bone health?
Yeah, well, women in this area, unfortunately, outperform men significantly up until the age of about 70. It begins to even out. So, in part of that is a large part of it, of course, is related to our hormones. And as we start losing those hormones, estrogen, namely, is the protector for muscle and for bone. When we start losing that in our early 40s, we start that decline or it gets easier. So for all of you who are now in your late 30s or early 40s, or you influence those young adults who are there, now is the absolute best time for them to establish that habit of strength training to begin the impact when they can, so that they can prevent the losses. We've experienced it because we didn't know any better. We now know better, and we can prevent them from having the same experience or being at this same point. Hopefully they won't experience this again for 20 years beyond where we were. Everything should get better with age. But once women go through that abrupt drop off, we don't decline slowly so much. We here's menopause, boom, right? You no longer have that estrogen, and it's that three-legged stool. We've removed that. So you've got to make sure the diet and the exercise components are definitely there. For men, they do kind of fly in, slowly come down. There is the andropause that they go through, or the menopause, but it's much more slowly. And once that catches up with them at about 70, now we're even again, and the risk factor is great. But women far surpass in terms of performance for osteoporosis. However, if you've got young men who have gut issues or who have been on steroidal type drugs, they are just as at risk as women are. So, things you pointed out, like the quality of our soil. All young men are raised, in the same way as young women. And our risk, unfortunately, could go up and get worse before it gets better with anybody who hopefully is not here, right? With anybody who's not becoming much more aware of, I have some control and I can take it back if I choose it.
Amazing. Well, before we go, I want to just mention a couple supplements that I think are absolute mandatory, and that would be iodine, because iodine is necessary for preventing osteoporosis, and it's not in our soils anymore. In fact, iodine levels were significantly lower in women with postmenopausal osteoporosis, and then it also helps reduce the inflammation related to arthritis. And one other thought is the relationship between hypothyroidism that is can lead to a higher risk of developing arthritis, fluid buildup in the joints, and swelling in the joints. And then what happens? You also are too tired to go work out and strength train. So it's this vicious cycle.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is the accelerated thyroid is helping reverse hypothyroidism in conjunction with the Acceleradine, helping support optimal bone formation, reducing arthritic symptoms, helping heal the thyroid, and helping with metabolism, increase fat burning, and the ability to build that strong, lean muscle. So I just wanted to mention those two. Of course, collagen's important and the right electrolytes, because you've got to combat the stress and acidity in the body that is causing the bones to leach out those good minerals. So balancing that out with the proper electrolytes. But Debra, is there anything else that we have not covered before we go?
Well, let me throw this in real quick. It's that, I mentioned we used to put people in bubble wrap or be very careful with what you do and do less. And we actually think there's probably never been a better reason to do more, to be more active, to get into the weight room. And studies within the last kind of just pre-pandemic are showing that women with osteoporosis, postmenopausal, actually respond really well to high impact exercise and to heavy or intense strength training. And of course, nobody starts there. You start with walking and you progress. You start with light weights and you progress. But that's what's making it possible to reverse osteoporosis. And the injury rate for those has been almost zero. And the reason that was first the guideline is simply because we were all so conservative. No one wanted to test someone with risk of fracture for fear that it would cause a fracture. But there was never any research that it did. And now we know.
Amazing. Well, I know that I follow you on Instagram and I love your exercises. Even I've been working out since I was a very little girl, but I still get fun ideas from you. So I love your Instagram profile. Can you please tell everybody where to find you and everything that you're involved in?
Well, on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Facebook, we're at Flipping50TV. Flipping 50 TV, and the website is flipping50 all words spelled out.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Debra, for joining us today. And thank you for everyone else for joining me. If I can help you with your health issues, you can contact me directly through the website, sarabantahealth.com. Happy to put together a protocol for you. And join the free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health. Let me know what you learned today. Debra is such an amazing wealth of knowledge, and I love what she does. Her teachings and her coaching really complements what I teach as far as diet and supplements. It's not just one piece of the puzzle, guys. There's so many things that you've got to incorporate to really feel your best and live your optimal self. The protocols, the supplements I discuss are all found at sarabantahealth.com. And you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Accelerated Health Products, across over 100 channels under Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. And if you like what you hear today, please hit the subscribe button and share with a few of your friends. Join me every Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific, Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific live. And you can use coupon WELCOME10 for 10% off site-wide. Thanks for joining us here and have a great week.